Thanks everybody for joining us in the live studio audience. That's fantastic. And for those of you who listen in later, we're so fortunate today to have Jamie Ludovic join us from Washington County, Wisconsin. Wow, Washington County has, awesome, been a leader in the priority-based budgeting movement for so long now. You can find their stories in Route 50. You can find them in Shane Kavanaugh's latest GFOA book, Financial Foundations for Thriving Communities. Again and again, we find ourselves learning from the great work in Washington County, and it's inspired where we have tried to take the vision of priority-based budgeting, so much so that we took we made our best offer to Brad Steckert, one of Washington County's finest, to come join our team so we can bake the DNA into the rest of the work. But today with Jamie, we just want to say thank you for being here on our program and sharing your wisdom with the PBB community. Thanks for being here, Jamie.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and Chris mentioned it, but I was actually hired to implement PBB in Washington County in the former county administrator's office. And then through my tenure and based on some of the experience I had, actually was shifted over to the parks and community development area to implement, I think, some of the heaviest hitting priority-based budgeting outcomes that came out of the process. Mostly because, there was a question about what it's going to take to actually implement this. And often, what we kind of came back with is aligning the priorities of the policymakers and the organization with, doesn't always align with the bureaucrats, or in this case, the director of parks. And so some of the things that we set out to do, it really is about getting the right people in the right bus on the right spot to a certain degree, because I always joke with the team here now that I have that they took a person who doesn't love trees and put him in charge of the trees. And so I think that was something that was somewhat intentional, but we've seen a lot of continued success from that. So I'm happy to share that story today.
We can't wait to get into it all. I know Eric Keck on the line. I'm sure he's just like dancing because of how you've talked about the cultural aspects. We can't wait to get into that part of your story and what you've learned and what you can share. We'll start with something simple, Jamie. We like to talk about what people are reading in the PBB community, and we're curious. Do you have a favorite book?
So I struggled with this one of all the questions. So for those of you that don't know, I have a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and I'm expecting my 4th child in about 6 weeks. And so what I read now is the assignments out of our cultural leadership team, which we've been reading books like Drive and What the Heck is EOS and Traction and business planning books. But mostly I read Dr. Seuss and the Lorax. And, so my favorite book, I'm going to go with I'm Not Going to Get Out of Bed Today. And if I have to recommend a book that everyone reads, Who Moved My Cheese? And I think that book is just really interesting because I always try to live by, our values here. And one of my personal values is happiness. And so I joke about with Brad Steckert when he left here, but, I always hope that people recognize when they can do more, they want to do more, they want to be in a different place. And I think that's a sign of strength when people can kind of recognize when they just don't quite fit anymore into what's happening in an organization or what's going. And it's a quick read. So if you haven't read it, Who Moved My Cheese is kind of the one I would go with.
I mean, you can't deny the cheese reference either.
That's right.
Wisconsin, yeah, exactly. So, fabulous. Sticking on the culinary track, cheese. Do you have a favorite food?
Cheese is probably up there. Macaroni and cheese, and pizza. So pretty classic.
I can't believe German nachos didn't make the top
I
three, but
almost said German nachos. I like nachos a lot, but I mean, they're not front runner. So
if,
yeah, it's good. I'm
for
hungry now
those
that
of,
you mention that.
for those of you listening in, one of my greatest memories is being on site with Josh and Jamie and some of the team. And I had never had German nachos before, but it was right there in the county seat. And it's a high recommendation. It's delicious. Anyway, that'd be my favorite for the contribution. And Jamie, you have a quote behind you, but I was kind of interested in, do you have a quote that inspires you in your work, in your life?
Yeah, and that's the one. So that's a board and brush that I did of my favorite quote, which I don't know if you can read it, but it says, "Don't let perfect be the enemy of good." And I think that, we do a lot of personality type testing in Washington County to make sure we're building thorough teams. Margie's on the call. Margie's our finance director. So she can attest to that as well. But one of the things that, we talk about visionaries and setting direction and being a leader. And so I always kind of come back to that of, we can spend a lot of time talking and vetting and trying to come up with things. And so I say it a lot to my team, like, okay, that's great. Now we gotta move, and we keep a certain level and a certain pace. And I try to remind people around me of that continually. So
It is a value, and you do live it. I mean, the entire priority-based budgeting process is probably imperfect, but it is directionally correct. And as you've walked through the process and implemented over the years, I think you've embodied that value, and I think it's just wisdom for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jamie, you started off talking a little bit about how you got hired at Washington County, and I would love to talk about just your journey into public service in general, and your education, your work history is tied to public service. When did you know that you wanted to work in public service?
Really early on. So I started working in public pools when I was 14, sort of lifeguard type. I think you hear a lot of lifeguards in public sector. And I had the typical very frustrating experiences. And I asked the question several times throughout my tenure, and I did some health inspections after that. Why can't this be better? Or why can't we be doing this? Or why can't we be doing this? And I can remember the day watching TV with my parents when I was in high school, and they were just complaining about taxes and government and all the powers that be. And I remember turning, looking at them on the couch and being like, are you going to do something about it? Or are you just going to sit there and complain about how terrible government is? So I guess I did kind of know that I always wanted to do public service, and, politics was very interesting to me. So I was a pretty hardcore college Republican, went down that path of, joint degree in public administration, got recruited out of the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse to go to Northern Illinois University's MPA program, which, for those of you familiar with the public sector, they have a mafia of alumni and a really, really great internship program and foundation. I owe my career to the village of Downers Grove in Illinois. I learned so much. It was 2018, and so it was of the Great Recession type time period. And so we did a lot of the fiscal planning, a lot of the priority-based budgeting concepts, actually. There was a very strategic village manager and deputy village manager. Mike Baker's still in the field. Dave Fieldman was the village manager at the time. And they really, he taught me, I know one of the other comments about one of the things, the hardest lesson to learn, which was, that oftentimes the most logical solution may or may not matter. And so that's kind of you kind of set out in that environment. From there, I went to work for Anne Marie Gora, who was in the village of Montgomery at the time. And she was another tremendous asset to me and gave me some opportunities. She was at a point in her career where I think she wanted to start giving back. And I was a huge benefit of that as a female in the profession, and seeing her leadership style. And then from there, this is the orange in me, but I got married. My husband had his career outside of Illinois, and he needed to move to make the next management step. And so I can remember the conversation where it was like, we know we wanted to be in Wisconsin, our family's in Wisconsin, but I can remember the conversation where I literally was like, oh my goodness, we are not getting any closer to being in Wisconsin, sitting in Illinois, complaining about Illinois, like, let's go. And so we went to Raleigh, North Carolina. He took a job in the Triangle. And that's where I first introed priority-based budgeting with Garner, North Carolina, under Hardin Watkins at the time.
Yeah.
And their council was interesting. They ultimately decided not to move forward because they knew that what was, in theory, going to be their lowest priorities, they still wanted to fund, and they weren't interested in having the hard conversations. And so I just really remember that was a really interesting, Hardin and myself as the budget manager really wanted to do this program and, be innovative. And it was just, there wasn't that level of interest in doing that with, and there wasn't kind of that need or that demand. And then we ultimately moved back where I took a job in Washington County as the assistant to the county administrator. And I'm now the director of community development there. So I have a master's from Northern Illinois and an undergraduate from La Crosse, and I'm going on about 10 years of work in the public sector.
Incredible. You said so many things in your statement there, like wow factors. One, tying together your point that the most logical solution isn't always what we move forward with, and also what the elected officials felt about PBB and Gardner, that they weren't necessarily ready or desiring this type of dialogue or to confront the challenges that PBB surfaces logically. We've often been asked the question, why wouldn't this be right for somebody? And I've always scratched my head, like, I don't know, things are perfect in your community, like, and then you wouldn't want this because you've already reached perfection. There's nothing to improve. But you gave me a better answer, which is you don't actually want to engage in those potentially tough conversations.
Yeah, and so we talk about this in parks all the time. So I always like to use the illusion with my team. So Washington County does basic human services, and the sheriff's department, jail, public safety. So I'm just and snow plowing. So I'm gonna just pick on using those three. I always tie it to the house example, right? And I know you use this a lot too in the work you do, but we're clearly the toys and the Wi-Fi over in parks. But people want to go to their house because they have toys and Wi-Fi and Netflix. So they like us. And so for somebody to point out to me, and even personally, like, well, hey, Jamie, you don't really need that trampoline in the backyard for your kids, or I know, but I still want it. And so going through that exercise, if you're not willing to take action and, say, yeah, I'm not going to fund the trampoline, I'm going to put more money into my refrigerator and healthy foods budget. Well, I'll just eat macaroni and cheese because I want my trampoline. So, that's fine. Like, so I think that, you say it that way, but I think that that's really important, is that if you're not if you don't have a council or a public policy body that wants to have the conversation, or that leadership, that it just isn't going to work.
Wow. Man, you have gold in your statements, and again, so much to learn. You've mentioned a couple of times as a kid talking to your parents about, hey, here's the situation. If you don't want to fix it, stop talking about it. And you seem to be so action oriented. And I've known this for good fortune we've had of working together. What inspires you to pursue innovation, even when, it can be not easy to do?
My total hatred for government, really. I mean, that's my personal motivation is that I really, really feel like government suffers from a competency issue on a lot of levels, and the ability for people to settle, the ability for people to get frustrated by the processes and exit the field because for a variety of reasons, both on at all levels in the leadership, and so I think that it continually motivates me to ask the question of what can we, how can we be better? What can we do better? And what's interesting in Washington County is I think that our county executive, Josh Schulman, for those that you know him, spent a lot of time building a team that really shares the values of the organization. And Margie, and there's really this kind of, and it really makes the difference in how you move forward. And they're kind of there as those constant reminders of, oh yeah, and then you get a success here and a success there, and all of a sudden it's really exciting and it's fun to work in when you're actually moving forward and not letting little things kind of draw you back.
So, so you've seen it. You've seen how things can be turned for the better, even starting from a place of, not being so pleased with how things work in government. You've seen how it can be changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this last year was super fascinating too, because so for those of you that know the story of Washington County Parks, essentially became the lowest priority of the county as it relates to the priority-based budgeting exercises, which resulted in a plan to save the parks to, on one hand, i.e. fund them without taxpayer support, and a divestment, and we actually went through the process of we had about 14 properties. We're down to about 9 of kind of prioritizing within the priorities where and what we wanted to be doing. And it was fun this last year with COVID. I hate to say that anything about COVID has been fun, but implementing an entrance fee at our parks and user fees to support them, we are fully off of the taxpayer levy. So we have a budget of about $800,000 in expenses that support our parks, and that's about what our revenue budget is now. After we worked on that for about 5 years, we just put out a press release yesterday about a beach expansion. And the point of it was the revenue streams coming from COVID belong to the users of the parks, and the investments in the lake's health and the fish sticks and some of the shoreline stuff that we're going to be doing, that we're going to bring back. And so we've really kind of, we hit rock bottom, we're kind of bouncing, and we've been building our expense budget for the past 2 budget cycles from a, hey, we can spend more on these places when the users are supporting what we're doing. And so we really have shifted our mentality completely. We're working on our business plans by park, for each individual park that really get into kind of that next level of how to operate.
Jamie, can we go back to, so you go through priority-based budgeting, the parks rank pretty low, and I can imagine at that moment there's probably some fear or trepidation from those who run the parks or work in the parks that who had been accustomed to receiving subsidy, property tax resources allocated to cover their budget, that their worry is, well, we're going to get cut. That's all there is to it.
Yeah, and they did get cut. We did get cut.
Okay.
So that happened. Yeah.
So then, what happened from that moment of, wow, my fate is sealed, we're out of business, to the idea of what if we took things into our own hands and came up with a different business model to fund the parks?
And that's really, not to and this was all the way from the top down, from, Josh to me to the rest of the team. It was taking the vision that the county board articulated, translating it to something that park staff can rally behind, right? Like, okay, we're going to get behind this. And for us, it was really, we're going to be sustainable. We're going to grow, or for certain members of our parks team. And we can do this because our resources are amazing. And we had the blessing and we had the communication from the county board that, yeah, go. You got an idea? Like, we'll entertain it. And we had a policy discussion about competing with the private sector. Washington County is a very, very, very conservative county. And so, that kind of just, it opened the door for our beer gardens, our sponsorships. We met this morning with one of our first park naming sponsors, and it was really incredible because they were the presenting sponsor of our new dog park which we funded with donations. And I said to them today, because their contract was up, they pay us annually. They were like, well, how much do what are you doing? And I'm like, the community's priorities with COVID are the same. We don't know where you're at. Like, we're not asking you for more. We just value the partnerships and the places we find in the community, and it becomes about relationships. But sorry to backtrack, to answer your question on the culture, you really have to have that conversation about what you're going to stand for and what direction you're going to go. And then I'd be lying if I said it wasn't getting people who don't buy into it off the bus. One of the first things that I did when I guess became the parks director by Q is, I pulled a new blood who was going to be up for, and we won award for innovative use of data and technology with our entrance fee implementation. We just are rolling out a new software program. Everything is automated. It works like iPass technology to a certain degree. Everything is license plate enforced, so there's very little fee collection work in the field, very little enforcement in the field. Everything is kind of behind the scenes. To find that entrepreneur, that person who's going to buy into this, who's going to see, if our parks have value and people will pay for them, how are we going to make this successful? And, we just lost Eric Hyde, who was our Parks and Trails manager since the beginning of this plan, to the Department of Natural Resources, state of Wisconsin. He's now running 4 northern parks, including Peninsula State Park, which is a huge park. But he always had this vision. The state of Wisconsin parks are also not funded by taxpayers. And so people who love the outdoors and love nature, there's a way to find peace with fees and with beer gardens and with camping revenue streams and vacation rentals. And, it takes a lot of people moving in the same direction to kind of open the doors on those revenue streams.
Did it, I have one follow-up question on, did it take time to get the rallying spirit? Did you have like hey, if we don't, did you have an ultimatum? Like, if we don't change this, our fate the other way is we're going to get completely cut. Was there some other consequence that was also motivating?
Yeah. So for us, not for me, because I wasn't really a parks person, but for many in my department, it was one of the first things that was done sort of separate the process was Ridge Run County Park, a beloved park of our rangers and park staff, which was totally encompassed by the city of West Bend, which essentially was, as part of another deal, was completely transferred to the city, which for the taxpayers makes perfect sense. The maintenance, the city employees are nearby. They're putting in an all-inclusive playground. That park now still does not have an entrance fee because it's a city park. So although it was the general public didn't see a transition, I mean, it was like ripping a piece of the Parks Department from them, like from their, pride and ownership of that park. And we prioritized these parks. We sold a property we called Marks, 2 properties. I hate to call them parks. They were really more like open space properties back to the private sector. We transferred 1 piece of a property to one of our conservation organizations for holding, as we've made it unequivocally clear we're not in the business of open space. Sidebar on that, we have 3 fabulous land trust organizations in our counties that do take that role and specialize in it. So, we just kind of said that's not our role. In one of the questions about, PVB asks those questions, right? What is your role? Is this serving? Is it mandated? Can someone else do it? So we offloaded property, and there's a lingering, and there still is to this day, that if we don't fund our budget, we will continue to downsize our properties until we can manage the properties that we have. And so we have some very beloved properties, people in our parks departments who built the properties, who actually physically worked on the construction of the beaches, the boat launches, the playgrounds, the cabins. And so they hold these places in very high regard. And so it's really, that's back to the whole save the parks cry, right? Like we can keep these under county ownership and do a good job at it. And we've since, I think, really built some places that people love and built on the marketing strategy of the parks.
Jamie, I can imagine for the listeners who are like, wow, so again, this storyline went from the county was funding the parks completely to the parks made their way towards a self-funded in their entirety business model. Again, in those early days when things like park fees or beer gardens, some of the alternative revenue strategies first came up, how did they come up, and how did you vet them with the community? Did you, I'm sure it was contentious at the time, like a parks fee, who's going to pay that? Is that appropriate? There's going to be an outcry. I'm sure there was naysayers before it got implemented, and now you have this awesome software that reads license plates. Like, how did the idea come to be, and how did you feel comfortable, like, we're going to do this?
Yeah. So, well, the idea on the entrance fee, that's not a new idea. State parks here charge for it. A county north of us has done it for 35 years with, the little kiosks. These are not local city parks. I mean, you have to drive to them. They are kind of destination, hiking, dog parks, camping. They're large. But so the idea was there, right? But so what happened was we kind of launched a marketing strategy that we called the Parks Fiscal Sustainability Plan at the time. And it was really 4 pieces. It was prioritizing to get rid of properties or identify properties that we didn't want to, be spending resources on. It was about the parks fee was another category. It was about innovative revenue stream ideas, where we talked about ideas like camping and beer gardens, and then there was a 4th category, and we did community workshops. So we did almost a full-on mini planning process where we gave a presentation of the finances, of kind of the challenges the county was facing. And comparatively, again, nobody wanted to, I think it's fair to say that nobody really wants to cut parks, but then there's that piece of it that is the reduction in service piece. But it's more about, we can't do both, right? We can't give you a new sheriff's deputy and continue to do these things. So it's more about the priorities of the county at large. And so it was, okay, well, that's great. So we're going to kind of have community dialogues about these things. So we did meetings, and then we also did an online survey. And one of the pieces I'll point back to, we did a presentation for Wisconsin Parks and Rec Association a while ago, but we pointed back to the survey, which was probably a little unfair. And, the survey people would say, well, you're tainting these questions. And we absolutely did that. We poised and phrased the questions, and we were really upfront that we were doing this. We already knew the answer to the question for the park users. Would you like a separate parks fee? They all did not want that. However, there are a significant amount of non-park users in Washington County that were also paying for these services on the tax levy, right? And those people were like, yeah, that's fine. Charge the people to go to the parks. We never go to them. So we surveyed the users and we got a lot of comments of, we don't want a park fee. But we then kind of pivoted the survey questions and all of the responses to, okay, we know you don't want a park fee. Now assume for a second that that decision is made. How would you like this to occur? And so part of that discussion was, if you go just south to Milwaukee, they don't have a Milwaukee County Parks fee, but they do have disc golf fees, dog park fees, certain beach fees, or kayak rental fees. In Washington County, we had no fees. We had no user fees for soccer clubs, for field usage. We had nothing. So we went through that process of, how do you want this fee to be? And we heard overwhelmingly from park users, just hit us once, right? We want the annual. We don't want to be charged for disc golf here and, this here and that here. Like, just make this easy, charge us the money and call it a day. And so that's what we did. And we went the route of, how do we help these users find the value in what they're paying for? And the camera approach, in hindsight, we have seen, I even hate to admit it, last year with COVID was embarrassingly the worst, with more park usage, 100% more park usage, which we know because of the cameras track all the entrances. And we've been using the data, the geography on everybody that comes in and out. The amount of inquiries from our sheriff's department, dumping has stopped. Investigations are made easier by our data tracking, and our sheriff's department calls on us more than I would like to admit of, we get the data for this date from this time to this time on who was in the park? We have reason to believe that, car X from Milwaukee came to the park. We're looking for more details. What do your cameras say? And so we've seen a lot of peripheral benefits to that. We just used the cameras on a parking study to demonstrate that our parking would be enough to support a beach expansion. So we're giving back. What I have found, and I always think this is interesting, is that the hatred for the fee is really more of a symbol of the politics than it is anything else. The park users are okay, they're fine paying. It's just more of the general direction of stating out loud that this was going to be a low priority and therefore we're going to charge a fee, right? Yeah. For the people who really, and when speaking to in our case, the chair of, or high-ranking Democrats in the county, and explaining to them, well, but these user fee revenues actually go directly back into the parks. And but they weren't paying anything. And now we're like, do you think it's fair that the taxpayers should pay for the soccer fields to be maintained for this specific club? Like, does that sound like it would be logical to you? Like, when you start to engage in those types of dialogues, people are like, oh yeah, well, I guess you're right. It doesn't really make sense for property taxes to pay for that. And so the user fee has really, I think, started. We're curving to generally accepted. The pandemic helped that. It's been about 5 years, but we're just kind of getting past that. The last county executive election, the major platform was, get rid of the park fees. And that wound up the team a little bit because we had built it, right? Built this fee system, seeing the revenue streams. And our immediate question is, how are we going to come up with $400,000 if you cut the park fees? Like, are you going to give us to that from the sheriff? Are you cutting the sheriff's department to fund the parks? How are we? But the real answer to that was, well, it's all in the logic, because I can cut the entrance fee and charge for the dog parks, or cut the entrance fee and charge for the disc golf and probably have the same impact, but I can tell you the park users didn't want that. So it's kind of interesting to look at that in hindsight and kind of now sit back and reflect on the data that we have coming in.
Amazing. You talked about beer gardens. I wanted to also shift gears into like beer gardens are super entrepreneurial. And you also were getting into naming rights and some of the partnership uh, ideas that are on the table. How are those going? And are they, do you see growth in those areas?
Yeah, so the beer gardens are going great. It's National Beer Day today. At 4 o'clock, we'll be announcing our summer series.
Today?
This winter we launched a burn garden where we did our beer garden people did 12 fire pits that you would rent. So this was kind of COVID spurred, and then they would use an app to deliver you beer to the picnic tables. So that piece of it, the park usage in 2020 just completely, I mean, it doubled. And so we saw the beer garden saw tremendous success. And the burn gardens, the winter activities, the sledding, we had a good winter for once in Wisconsin, at least in January. And so we saw a lot of success there. That is kind of paired and I think dialed back a little bit by the cultural pressures around COVID and kind of this idea that there are a lot of people really struggling in our community right now. And so, I kind of mentioned it this morning, but I said to somebody, like, I'm not going to ask you for more right now because I don't need it. We're financially sustainable with the revenue streams we have. Our camping revenue, boat launch revenue, user fee revenue, venue revenue, because our venues did well because of their outdoor abilities, are all very strong. So because of that, we have pared back on approaching the private sector for community sponsorships, mostly because of, it's just a hard time to ask for money. And if we are like really to support the outdoors, like we're already sustainable, like our nonprofits in the county really need help right now. So we're not pushing that, but we do have a couple agreements already in place. And we have been working on a few campaigns. We do more of, since we have to pay for everything, the beach expansion is a good example. We're doing that. We are approaching sponsors for that. We're using a tree sponsorship program to fund and plant all the new trees. So we're doing it on a smaller scale. We have some partners who continue to give money for, almost like things that we just wouldn't do if we couldn't. But we do have the policies, the procedures, the contracts all in place to essentially sell and name anything within our park system. And that's kind of out there. So we're, it's always out there, but again, that's all relationship based. And so it has to be, Washington County has a lot of other things going on globally than just the parks. And so we're starting to kind of actually make sure we're taking our place in those conversations with regards to what are the highest needs of the various, local governments. So we went hard on that about, this had to be like 2018, got it all ready to go, kind of we're posturing for 2019. And then, with COVID, we just kind of stopped that effort. And we had a lot more money budgeted for that, but that we kind of just pared down and supplemented with some of the growth in other areas.
And it fits in with your, economic vitality or stewardship of the local economy result areas as well. How you're prioritizing who you're asking for those resources. And there's something that in the way that you tell the story that you maybe you weren't born to be a parks director. This wouldn't have been the first place where you would say like, hey, I belong in the parks running this, where some people that might be their thing. What's striking to me about that, Jamie, is that you could have done this in any department. And I've shared your story, what I have come to learn about it at a high level with some other organizations we work with. And in particular, there's one library director who she's looking out towards the future of libraries and just back to your toys versus the house payments, prioritization, comparison. Libraries are definitely important, but they're also in the trampoline or the books or the toys compared to more of the infrastructure and transportation and public safety and so on. There's something inspiring about your story that if I was any department director, you can take control of your own destiny. You might have a chance of at least putting a plan together and saying, let's explore financial independence if we are currently vulnerable and dependent on perhaps an ever decreasing amount of transfer from general government resources. Why wouldn't we at least put a plan together for how we could achieve financial independence? And my basic question is, do you have other departments who are looking at what Parks has done and thinking to themselves, man, maybe we should come up with a financial independence plan? Or if not other departments, are there other board members or Josh himself who are thinking, can we replicate this idea in other departments?
Yeah. So, and this isn't a little bit about our structure. So we have a county executive now. I am appointed by our county executive. I have certain categories of responsibility. When this was done, Parks, it wasn't just the Parks financial sustainability. This was actually done for a variety of different pieces of the government. One of them was our fair park. So that's kind of a separate organization that runs the Washington County Fair. So they were asked to put together a complete, we had been giving general operating dollars to the fair, to the organization operating the fair. So that was one area. Another area was, so let's see, it was fiscal, and Margie, maybe you can jump in and help me here, but so fair park, parks, our visitors bureau was another area, which is still receiving some general resources. But it was really all of these. And then there was nonprofits where we dialed back funding from as well, that were where the direction and the conversation really was like, the trough is coming to an end. Like, we're not going to allocate general dollars to these things, and someone is going to fill the gap or work to fill the gap. And what's motivating about it is you find complacency in the tax dollars coming to you, and really it kind of, if you want to, the example that I'll use, and this is sort of real time happening to us, is, our golf course, which is another area that I have responsibility over, is financially sustainable. So much so that it is now part of our Parks fiscal sustainability plan, and we're hoping to use the resources that it profits for one-time expenses in the parks. That's our ultimate goal, so that we can kind of offset that. But if you want to send a message against innovation or against profit or business or thinking minded in the public sector, then hand somebody property tax dollars when they're not doing well. And this came up during COVID with our golf course, who, as a sidebar, our golf course is just amazing. It had a record year in 2020. It is poised. It's ranked nationally all of the time. But we did furloughs in Washington County early on during COVID. And so as the golf person over the golf course, it came to me with, the golf course is an enterprise, they're self-sustaining. I had about, 24 hours to think about this. And at the time, the decision was, yep, we're going to participate in the furloughs because I was like, well, we'll probably take a loss this year. It'll be a bad year and we'll have to reevaluate next year. But at the time, I was thinking, well, and I told the staff this later when they made record numbers and wanted their 2 weeks of wages back, right? Like, hey, why did we have to get furloughed? We had this amazing year. And the answer was, well, I could have, and I almost said, you know what, don't furlough us. If the golf course isn't profitable, I'll furlough them all in October, November, December, and January, because they are a business and they are supposed to be self-sustaining. And it really resonates with them and they know, and we have open conversations about, you don't get tax levy money. So if you are not if we don't perform, then we have to make the hard decisions. And that is motivating to people in its own versus kind of that trough of, oh, it's no problem. The general fund balance of whatever it is, Margie knows it's healthy policy. It'll bail us out. It's there for COVID emergencies, which in this case, we actually took the earlier approach. And my comment was, we're furloughing right now with everyone else. And if we have to use general fund reserves in 2020, we will. I wasn't going, and then we would adjust for 2021, right? We would make those changes or those decisions in the future. But so we have that scenario and that mindset across the county, our highway department, transit. There are certain other elements where it's applicable. And the county executive is now working on, and I mentioned this book, Traction Business Plans, that every department in the county will be doing. And they're really more targeted at exactly that concept. Where are we going? What are we trying to achieve? And what's the long-term plan? Chris, do you have, yes. Have you read it?
Yeah, it was great. So we use it.
So we're finalizing, actually I have a meeting this Friday. Every one of our parks has its own unique, revenue stream plan, target audience, and we'll be working on that. So, and I actually am going to ask Chris, do you have any final questions? Because I do have another commitment that I need to hit, but I want to make sure I give us time to wrap up.
I was going to do two things. One, if any audience member has a question, please either come off mute and ask or indicate, hey, I've got a question in the chat, because I definitely want to give those of you who made the time to come be here with us the chance to ask Jamie anything on your minds. And Jamie, I would, respectful of your time and so thankful that you took the time to be with us. Do you have any final words of advice, places to get started, inspirational rallying cries for the audience that you can do this? I would love to give you the final word as well.
No, other than I'm really proud of, and it's not really PBB related, but I'm really proud of the technology systems we've developed with our camera license plate enforcement entrance fee work we're doing. And we'll be working on the next generation of that. Very low startup costs, very high deliverable on what funding comes back. It doesn't work, it's based on this idea that people would drive into the parks. So it won't work necessarily in every location. But if that's something that you're interested in learning more about, we do have some materials, we have some costs that we've put together, and I'm happy to share those.
Please do.
I think I'll actually put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to reach out directly.
That's great. We would love to share anything that you're willing to share with at least the PBB community. Again, the inspiration of your story is it can be done. You can move from subsidized and low priority to financially independent and growing in a responsible way. And that is just pretty breathtaking. So
yeah, it's fun. It's fun too.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I just said it's fun too. Lastly, you were going to say.
Oh, any last chance for anybody to say something to Jamie or simply give her a round of applause. Jamie, I'll wrap it up and just say thank you so much for being a part of our community and sharing your time with us today. We will follow up with you for as much information about this as you are willing to share, because again, we see department after department, not just parks, who face a future where it's unclear where their funding is going to come from and where the priorities might be. And you've created an open door for, well, take control of your own destiny and see what you can accomplish.
We feel really good. So we're working on camping cabin expansions. We've got, ROIs built out for where these models are going to go and how it's going to fund certain parks. And we feel really good about the concept of we're not really worried about our revenue streams. We built, what was interesting is we sold some of that property that I mentioned. which our council agreed to give us as a fund balance essentially. So it's a savings account. And if we don't spend money or we have staff vacancies, the money goes back to our own fund. We're a separate business entity now. And I think that the team, we're hiring people that are, I think, thinking a little bit differently. And so I think that that's really, there's just so many small examples on a daily basis that just, I think, speak really highly of the work that can be done if people are, motivated and willing to kind of think outside the box.
Totally cool. Jamie, I'll let you get on to your next order of business. Thank you again so much. Really appreciate it. And for everybody else, we'll be posting this on our website. And please do make sure you capture Jamie's email address so you can stay in touch with her as well. Jamie, thanks a lot. And we'll go ahead and bring it to a conclusion.
Yeah, have a great day, and thanks for having me.
All right, take care.
Bye.